everyone. In this video, we're going to provide a little bit of an in-depth exploration of unpacking standards, which is serving as a foundational guide for 6th through 8th grade North Dakota State standards in mathematics. Future presentations provided will focus solely on the unpack standards themselves and won't have additional audio commentary such as this. This is just our intro video, if you will. And in this particular one, we're going to unpack the standards with which we're going to be covering in your first learning menu. Most of the standards that we're covering in the learning menu have been identified as priority standards by North Dakota. Why you won't see all of the standards in upcoming presentations because of that. So we're only going to focus today on the categories number and operations and its subcategories, along with algebraic reasoning and its subcategories from our learning menu. So let's talk first about the components of the North Dakota standards. First, we're going to start off with a grade, and these are particularly 6th grade, and they're laid out in the standards, of course. Then we're going to look at the category, which is that NO, numbers and operations. Then we break into the subcategory, and this subcategory specifically is number systems. And then within each subcategory, we have the standard itself. Okay, so we're going to be looking and drilling down into the standard and what's involved within that standard. But notice we've got 6, which is the grade level, NO, which is the category, and S, which is the subcategory, and 1, meaning it's the first standard within that subcategory. What does unpacking standards mean? So unpacking standards is needed to assist with the dissecting of a complex idea into smaller parts to reveal a clearer understanding of its components and implications. It's about transforming the broad, overreaching goals into specific, measurable learning objectives. Unpacking standards is kind of like peeling an onion. And when I say unpacking standards is like peeling an onion, I'm emphasizing the layered nature that standards have. Just as an onion has multiple layers, a standard encompasses various levels of understanding and skills. It's important that we unpack standards because, first of all, it provides clarity. It helps us as teachers understand the exact expectations of the standard itself. It prevents teachers from trying to teach too much at one time, so it's really honing in on our focus. It allows us to tailor instructions to meet the diverse needs of our learners, which we know is important for differentiation. And ultimately, it helps us create meaningful assessments that we can align within the standards themselves. So here are the first 2 standards within the category number and operations, with the subcategory NS is number systems. Okay, so taking a look at these particular standards, I'm going to first underline any key concept, a vocabulary word, an idea that are all associated with that standard. So how do I unpack them? I'm going to identify the standard, which we have, clearly define the standard you're working with. We're going to identify any key concepts, such as determining the main ideas or concepts within the standard. We're going to identify the abilities students need to demonstrate. We're going to next determine the depth of knowledge. And that's where Bloom's taxonomy will come in handy. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And think about how the standards relate to real-world applications, because we can see that I've underlined authentic problems, aka real-world application. So notice that the things that are underlined are skills learners need to be able to do within each standard. The next one is looking at the verbs that are linked to the concepts, vocabulary, and ideas. When we're unpacking standards, verbs are crucial as they indicate the actions or skills students are expected to demonstrate. We know that there are lots of different verbs out there. There's first cognitive verbs. Those are verbs such as knowing verbs, comprehension, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Then, of course, there's action verbs. Communicate, perform, create. Other verbs that we might come in contact might be demonstration verbs, using verbs, or developing verbs. It's important to remember Bloom's taxonomy. It can be a helpful tool for helping us categorize verbs based on the different cognitive levels. The specific verbs used will depend on the subject area and grade level. So just because I'm unpacking standards in math, you can unpack standards just like this in any content area. But it's essential to understand the depth of knowledge required for each verb. So when I circle the verbs, I am showing the verbs, and this is how learners will show they know the concepts, vocab, and ideas. So they not only need to explain relationships, but they also have to show the relationships. I'm representing quantities in authentic context. Those quantities are rational numbers. I have to explain what the meaning of 0 is. I need to write, interpret, and explain statements for order of rational numbers on a number line and in a real context. So there's a lot of things happening within each of these standards, even though they are only sentences long. After I decomposed each one of my standards, I kind of looked at it a little bit and almost assigned what students should be able to do within those standards. So in the first standard, we should be able to understand opposites. They should be able to identify the opposite of a given rational number and explain the relationship between a number and its opposite. With the second standard, I need to be able to compare and order. So I included some symbolic representation: less than, greater than, equal to. I need to show real world connections. They should be able to apply opposites and ordering in real world applications or authentic problems. So these were kind of my rewording, almost like student objectives, what they should be able to do at the end of the standard itself. Here is another standard that's in number and operations, except this particular standard is the subcategory operation. Apply multiplication and division of fractions and decimals to solve and interpret problems using visual models, including authentic problems. So the first thing I'm doing is underline any of those key concepts, vocabulary, and ideas. These are things that students need to be able to do within each standard. And then the verbs I circled. How are they going to show that they can complete the concept, vocab, and ideas? And then in other words, now we're moving into the category of algebraic reasoning and the subcategory ratios and proportional relationships. So first, again, I'm going to underline any of the key concepts, vocab, and ideas. Again, these are skills learners need to be able to do within each standard. And before you move on, why don't you pause the video and see if you can identify the verbs that we will link to each one of these concepts, vocabs, and ideas. By circling the verbs in each sentence, how learners will show they know the concepts, vocab, and ideas. And then I also have in my own words what students should be able to do by the end of those standards. Now we're moving into the category of algebraic reasoning, but within the subcategory of expressions and equations. Before moving on, I do have a couple hints here. I do have a couple outline. Can you underline the other key concepts, vocab, and ideas before moving on? How'd you do? Again, these are skills learners need to be able to do within each standard. How about those verbs? Right, we've got reading, writing, and evaluating. And then, in other words, the main ideas and vocab and how we're going to show them. Here's a couple more. Again, the key concepts, vocab, and ideas for standard 5 and 6 within the subcategory of expressions and equations. And then again, highlighting writing, solving, recognizing, and representation as our verbs for how we're going to show these concepts, vocabs, and ideas. Well, where do we go after we unpack standards, right? Unpacking standards is a crucial first step in effective curriculum planning, but it's just the beginning. This will help with curriculum mapping, helping us determine the logical order in which to teach the unpack standards. It may help with pacing as we allocate appropriate time for each standard based on its complexity and importance. When I look at just one sentence, it may not seem like a large standard, but as we decomposed it or unpacked it, there was actually quite a lot that we had to do within each standard. Perhaps it might help us integrate and find opportunities for standards to blend together with other subjects and or units. In elementary, we teach multiple subjects usually. And by doing so, we could combine some standards together, maybe implement reading and writing into math, or science in math, or social studies into math. It will help us write learning objectives and essential questions. We can create specific learning objectives to develop clear and measurable learning goals for each unpacked standard. We can develop and formulate essential questions, frame inquiry-based learning experiences around these key concepts. This alignment will help us design assessments that directly measure student achievement of the unpacked standards. It also helps us incorporate a range of assessment methods: formative, summative, authentic, or comprehensive data. It will help us develop engaging and interactive activities that support the student learning of the standard, plan instruction to meet the diverse needs of our learners, to celebrate differentiation. It identifies appropriate instructional materials and resources. We could also explore how technology could be used to support learning and assessment. By incorporating technology, it could, the digital tools to increase student motivation and engagement. Much more on unpacking these standards will come in subsequent EDUC courses. Please remember that our goal in Ed 278 is to make sure we have the skills in mathematics needed for grades 6 through 8. We are not a math methods course, so we're not a course on how to teach the math, but I thought it was important that we take a moment to read the standards and understand what the standard is telling us to make sense of the assignments within our class.